Okay, we finally reached day 3 of Jackson's early years. So this will be the final lesson about his early years, and then day 4 we will start talking about Jackson as president. Before we get started with new stuff today, we're going to cover a couple of questions, some Bell Grant questions to review what we should have learned yesterday. So the first question is, what offices did Jackson hold in Tennessee? So Jackson, I highlighted them up here. Before he even held office, he did teach school briefly, and then he went to practice law. And then his first appointment was a prosecuting officer in the Superior Court in Nashville, Tennessee. He was then the new state's first congressman. And after that, the Tennessee legislature elected him as the U.S. Senator. But he only served that seat for one session before resigning. After his resignation, he served 6 years as a judge on the Tennessee Supreme Court. And then he kind of started his military career, which continued with when he was elected Major General of the Tennessee Militia, then the Major General of the U.S. Forces, and then ultimately the Major General of the regular Army. So he was a pretty good Army general. And he actually will become a national hero of the War of 1812, which we've actually already talked about when we covered the War of 1812. And he's going to get this nickname, Old Hickory. That's important that he gets this nickname. So one of my questions was, how does he get this nickname? And it's because of this decisive defeat over the British at the Battle of New Orleans. And remember, that battle wasn't even supposed to happen because of the treaty that was being signed overseas. But remember, the communication was really slow, so the treaty never got there. Neither Britain or America knew, and they still fought the battle. And it was actually a pretty big win for the U.S. under his leadership. He got this name Old Hickory because of his strict discipline on the march. His men began to say he was as tough as hickory, and that nickname stuck. So hickory is a tough type of tree. All right. So moving on to today's stuff, we're going to talk about the election of 1824, which he doesn't win this election. It's actually pretty crazy what happens here. There's actually a corrupt bargain that goes on. This election is actually referred to as the stolen election. So there's some weird stuff going on here. Before we get into it, we're going to talk about suffrage real quick. Now, suffrage means the right to vote. So anytime you hear this word suffrage, it's talking about the right to vote. So during this time, the only people that were allowed to vote were white males, and going even further, only white males who owned property. So in other words, wealthy males. So it was kind of limited, but as time went on, that they kind of lifted this rule, and you're going to read that right here when you guys go to read this, which helps Jackson, because remember, Jackson came from a poor family. So when he goes to run for president, he's going to represent the common person. He's not going to be gunning for those wealthy people and their votes. He's going to be representing just the everyday average person. So when you read this, read more about that suffrage, and you'll answer 3 questions there. And then we're going to talk about this section here is going to talk about that stolen election I talked to you guys about, which is actually pretty crazy. So basically what happens, and you're going to see even more down here, is that Jackson actually wins the popular vote and he gets a higher percentage of the electoral vote. But because he doesn't get the majority of the electoral vote, in other words, he doesn't get 50% or more, it went to the legislative branch, and there's a bargain, and I don't want to ruin it for you guys. So you're going to read it, and it's kind of messed up. So this guy Clay is kind of his enemy here, and he helps Adams. They come up with a bargain, and you guys are going to read about that all in here. You have 2 questions answered there. Then you have this electoral map, which you guys are used to by now. And then you have 4 questions on that. And then, sorry, today's kind of a long lesson, but then you're going to get to how these differences between that guy Clay I just mentioned and Jackson lead to new political parties. So if you look up here, you already got 4 different guys running. There's no parties. So parties are just crazy right now. So we're going to see 2 new political parties form, the Democrats and the Whigs. So if you guys remember all the way back a couple units ago when there was the Democratic Republicans and the Federalists, yeah, so we got 2 more now. We got the Jacksonian Democrats, or the Democrats, and then the National Republicans, who we're going to refer to as the Whigs. So you have a chart here talking about the differences between those 2 parties, and then you have 3 questions, finally 2 review questions to answer here, And then once you guys hit this Jackson is president day 1, that's where you're going to stop. All right. Enjoy the corrupt bargain you're going to read about today.